Hello and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Writing Asian LGBTQ Characters. I'm Sadie Lee. I'm the author of The Sidekick Squad and the forthcoming Clash of Steel. I'm so excited to chat with you all today.
We're excited too.
Yay! Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll go next. I'm Sabina Khan. I'm the author of The Love and Lies of Rukhsana Ali, and my latest release, ZARA HOSSAIN Is Here, which just came out a month ago. And I'm really excited to join everyone today and have a really good chat.
And my name is Misa Sugiura, and this is my latest book, my third book. It's coming out June 8th. It's called Love and Other Natural Disasters. It's a lesbian rom-com with lots of Asian characters, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about it with you and talk about writing queer Asian stories.
I'm Adiba Jaigirdar, and I'm the author of the HENNA Wars, and my upcoming book is HANI and ISHU'S Guide to Fake Dating, which is out May 25th. And I'm also super excited to be here talking to everyone about queer Asian characters.
And last but not least, I'm Lyla Lee, and I'm the author of I'll Be the One, which came out last year, and it's about a bisexual Korean American teenager who enters a K-pop competition to be one of the world's first plus-size K-pop stars. And almost all my characters in the book are like Asian and queer.
That's so exciting. Thank you all for being here. This will be a fun conversation. We're going to talk about everything from craft to how we got started. And speaking of how we got started, I introduced myself and didn't mention anything about my books other than the title. But the Sidekick Squad is a superhero post-dystopian universe which has a cast of queer characters. In the first book stars Jess, who's a bi Chinese and Vietnamese American girl. A Clash of Steel, which comes out this fall, is a Treasure Island remix with a Chinese and Vietnamese protagonist. And it's going to be super fun, and it's also super queer. But yeah, a little bit about how did you all get started in writing and publishing, and tell us a little bit about your journey.
I'll go. So I was never thought I was going to be a writer. I mean, I sort of always dreamed about it as a little kid, but never considered it seriously as a thing that I was going to do. I didn't really think I would ever sell a book or write a book even. And then it was kind of a midlife crisis decision to just be like, what would I do if I weren't afraid to fail? And when I was very honest with myself, I realized actually I did want to write a book. So I read a few different kinds of books and realized that I had, I could do a young adult voice. And then I had to think about what kind of book I wanted to write. And I knew I wanted to write about Asian characters. And I was certain, I also knew I wanted to write about queer characters. And and when I began to read to see what was out there, I realized that this was back in 2014, 2015. Almost all the books about Asian characters, the Asian characters were straight, and almost all the books about queer characters, the queer characters were white. So I just thought there needs to be a book about Asian characters who are LGBTQ. So so I wrote one, and actually I'm gonna just put this one up here. This is the book that came of that decision. And yeah, I got lucky because the market was, or the publishers and editors were ready at that point to buy a book about a queer character of color. And so here I am today.
I can go next. My story is actually very, very similar to Mita's. I also didn't come to writing until much later in my life. And, you know, as a young kid, I loved reading, and I always dreamed about being a writer, but it was more as a hobby, not as like a career. Back then, I didn't really think that someone like me could just write a book and get published or anything like that. Until, you know, my kids were in their teens and they were reading young adult books. Young adult books themselves were new to me because when I was growing up, there was no young adult category. I just went from children's to very inappropriate adult books for way too young. I was way too young to read, but I didn't, you know, I'd outgrown children's books. So when I started reading young adult books with my daughters, just so I could talk to them about it, I found the voice so refreshing, and I found the characters so bold and brave, and they weren't afraid to tackle serious, you know, adult issues, which is very realistic because, you know, teenagers aren't, you know, only dealing with children's issues. So and around the same time, my youngest daughter came out to us as bisexual, and I started thinking of, you know, what kind of a story I wanted to write where I could sort of, you know, give the character a different identity than what I'd read growing up, which were really just all white characters. So I wanted to write a story about a Muslim teenager who is also a lesbian and comes from a fairly conservative family where this was not, you know, her relationship was not acceptable to them at all. And, you know, the things that happen after that are pretty harsh, but I also wanted it to end in a kind of a hopeful manner. I actually got my first, I got my start through Pitch Wars. You all know about Pitch Wars, right? So the Twitter pitch contest where I had pitched the idea for RUKHSANA, and I got my agent through that. And then we worked, you know, on it for a while, for a few months, and then we got an offer from Scholastic. And I've been with Scholastic since then. And then from my next book, ZARA HOSSAIN is Here, I wanted to show a different side because, you know, as authors of color, we always sort of run this risk where our characters become the representation for the entire population of, you know, our community. And I didn't want to only, you know, write, you know, the only book that I've written being about a very conservative Muslim family. So in ZARA HOSSAIN is Here, the family that she's in is more closely resembles us, as myself as a parent. And, you know, her parents are completely supportive of her, whatever she, you know, however she wants to live her life and whoever she is, and they will stand by her. And I wanted to show that, you know, there are people of all kinds with all kinds of attitudes and mentalities in every community. And so, you know, I'm really grateful that I get to write these characters because it's important for me that, unlike myself, my kids at least get to see themselves in the stories that they read, and they don't feel like they're always, you know, just missing from all the books that they encounter. So yeah, that's kind of my story.
So for me, I guess it was a little bit different because I've been writing since I was very young. Basically, since I learned how to write, I've been writing stories. I always wanted to be an author, but I didn't really know if I was allowed to be an author because I, you know, never saw authors of color. I never saw characters of color. So for a long time, you know, when I was writing white characters and definitely not writing queer characters ever. And then I think what really kind of sparked like motivation for me to write my debut, The HENNA Wars, was reading authors like Sandhya Menon, Jenny Han, Becky Albertalli, and seeing that, you know, they were writing these stories about you know, South Asian people and queer people, and they got to kind of have their happy ending. And I realized that this was kind of what I wanted to write because I had never had that growing up. I never like saw characters who looked like me. So yeah, just reading these books, they really inspired me. And so I decided to write the HENNA Wars. And then honestly, from there, it was a pretty smooth journey for me. I think it took me a very short time to get my agent. Like 3 months from when I sent out my first query. And again, a pretty short time to get my book deal as well. So in that case, you know, I was pretty lucky, but you know, when we talk about our publishing journey, I think often we look at like, oh, from when we start querying our book. But for me, you know, it was really from when I was like 5 years old and I started writing stories all the way up until now.
Yeah, and also I think my journey is also very similar to Adiba in that like I also started writing when I was very young. But I feel like I wasn't as smart about it, and that like I started querying when I was in 8th grade. I had no idea what I was doing. But and then like I mean to kind of give you an idea of like how much I like waddled through it is I sent my first query in 2008. That was in 8th grade, and then I got my first agent in 2016 after I graduated college. So yeah, a bit of a long journey, but similar to Deepa in that like I also started out writing books about like white characters because there was like I actually started writing about queer characters before I started writing my Asian characters because like I was reading books when I was growing up. I was reading books about like about like white teenagers who were queer or Asian characters, but there was never that there was never that overlap. So I think a lot of my journey has been like trying to like kind of overlap the two of my identities, and it worked out because my debut, which came out like 4 years after I got my agent, it's about a Korean American girl who's bisexual, and she's not out to her parents and not out to the world, but it's still a very important part of her identity. And then she takes solace in the fact that there are other queer Asian teens like her. And that's kind of similar to my own journey in that like I also well for me I think I didn't know I was queer until I was like 20, which is very late. But then I think I grew up kind of like questioning and like, but also like I kind of grew up in a very conservative household where it's like talking about like well in my household basically like my parents basically like made it seem like it wasn't like Asian people could be queer. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, so I wrote this book because I kind of wanted Asian teens out there to like know that like you can be Asian and queer, and like there are a lot of people out there like them.
No, that's great. I had a very similar journey to like when I was writing really young, but I always wrote like white characters and I wrote like straight characters because I was like, this is this kind of stories people want to hear and like people want to like that are willing to read. And I really internalized all of these things where it's like, you know, the kind of stories I read, these happy endings, like these grand adventures, these, you know, romances and everything were not meant for me. Like I could read them and I could enjoy them, but like I could not really see myself in them. And really it is interesting like being like, because Not Your Sidekick came out in 2016. And so it felt like back then I got a lot of like people who are like, oh, that's cool. Like no one's gonna want to read about like a girl falling in love with another girl. But it's really exciting to see like so many books like continue to thrive and exist, and like just how queer fiction has evolved since then. And yeah, it's really great just to see. Like I love all of your books. I'm so excited we have this opportunity to chat. Yeah, should we move on to our next topic?
Sure, yeah. I think we wanted to talk about craft. And I always feel a little funny when we talk about craft because I always feel like a fake writer, a fake author when we talk about craft, because I don't have like a very systematic process or anything. I usually start from a character, like just a character in my head, and that character is always based on something I've experienced myself, either as, you know, a young brown person in Bangladesh who is also you know, an immigrant here as an adult. I was 26 when I moved here, and then as a mother whose kids are growing up here. And so all those experiences sort of, you know, helped me to come up with a character. And there's so many stories, so many perspectives that I've always wanted to talk about or to share. And so I always start with that. And usually I'll just have this idea and I'll just do like a rough kind of a, it's not, yeah, I guess it would be a synopsis just to see if that, you know, story actually, I can actually write a full story and not just have this amazing idea, exciting idea, and then it doesn't go anywhere. So I usually write out like just kind of, you know, a rough document where I just kind of tell the story the way I would explain it to someone who's hearing it for the first time. And then I usually just start writing, and it's all based on like feelings, what that character would feel and what they're observing and what they're experiencing. And usually, because I don't have an outline, there's inevitably the point where I get stuck and I don't know where to go from there. And at that point, I will usually go back and start sort of planning out a little more methodically. Other times I can write more than half of the story without running into that problem. But, you know, it's just, I've only written 3 books so far. So it's been different with each one. With the first one, it just came pouring out of me and I wrote the first draft. It was a very bad first draft, but I wrote it in 16 days and I was writing for like 10 to 12 hours a day. I just couldn't stop myself, and I was afraid if I stopped that I wouldn't be able to finish it or start up again. So I just wrote it all, and it was terrible. And then obviously, you know, changed a lot in multiple revisions. With Zara, I was already traveling, you know, for RUKHSANA for promotions, and so I wrote it like in bits and pieces. My last book, which I wrote it in the pandemic, and I wasn't going anywhere, so that one I actually planned it out a little bit more, and I knew what I was like. I always knew what was happening ahead. So basically, to say that I think, at least for me, each book has been a completely different experience. And other than that, I mean, I have an issue. I can't read young adult books while I can't read anything really while I'm writing, because I just, if I read a really good book, I you know, really start doubting myself, and everything I write just sounds awful. And so I kind of put it away, and I'm like, I can't write like this. And so I've just stopped reading while I draft, because it just, I don't know, it just gives me a lot of doubt, and it makes it very difficult. But I'm really, really interested to hear, you know, about your all, how you all write. You know, what's your craft like? What's your process? And
I just want to jump in. I love that you don't read YA while you're writing, because I've gotten a little bit better, but I actually sometimes, there are a couple of YA, there are a couple of books that I don't like, whether it's by YA authors or other authors. I just feel like, yeah, and so I will deliberately read books that I think are not good to make myself feel better.
Yeah. We do what we have to do, right?
I'm like, if they could finish that book, like I can finish this one. I'm petty. It's just, oh well. Yeah, anyone else can jump in. I was just wanted to say that.
That's a really good, like, I tend to get a lot of that self-doubt too, but sometimes, like, because like, oh, I'm need to finish reading this for this conversation, or I want to read this because my friend wrote it, or I'm excited to read it and I can't stop because I want to read it so badly. But I try not to read exactly in the genre that I'm writing in. So like when I was writing A Clash of Steel, I did not read any like pirate related media, or like any sort of, like, I tried not to consume anything that would like inadvertently influence me. I read, and you know, while I was writing the superhero series, I tried not to read or do anything excessively like superhero-y, because I didn't want that to like mess with my own, like the world that I was building. But I do tend to, I'm very weird. I don't know if anyone else does this. I write non-chronologically because I try to like just like tap into the moment of just like a scene comes to me or a character moment, and I try to jot them down before these thoughts flit away. And so it is kind of a chaotic process where I'm just like drafting scenes, and then I have to like puzzle piece and tie them together and then write more scenes. But like the very first messy draft is always like, what am I feeling at the moment? What are the characters? I might not know who they are yet, so I'm just writing down a like super messy draft, and then I like go through it and then I rewrite it and then I link pieces together. And I guess there are some drafts that are more cohesive than others, where I do start from like one point and then keep going from there, like in the order of the adventure. But I'm very much like a discovery writer. Even though with a series I did have to plan and think ahead about what was happening. But as far as like standalones go, it's funny. It was like, what's going to happen next? I don't know yet. I have to figure out. And sometimes what happens is like, oh, we'll try that, and that didn't work. And like, oh, what if this happened instead? And just having a lot of brainstorming sessions and like thinking about. It's a very organic process. There is a lot of like, there are drafts and drafts of like words that are like scenes that just never make it into the book. But it's part of the process, you know. Like, you know, you know, if you're practicing the piano, like the scales that you're playing they're not in the final piece that you play or perform, but they're part of like your journey and your experience.
My writing process is like always different. So it's like everything that's come up, it's all of them combined, I guess. It really depends on the book. So I just try to follow like, I guess, what my instincts are telling me to do. So, you know, I've completely pantsed books. The HENNA WARS and Honey and ISHU'S Guide to Fake Dating, they're both completely pantsed. Honey and ISHU I actually wrote in 30 days. So I had no idea about anything before I started writing it. I just wrote it, and that's all I know about the craft of that book. But then, you know, my future projects, I have A Million to One, which is like a historical, which actually doesn't actually have any queer Asian characters, but has queer characters and Asian characters. And then I have another book, Do Not Fall in Love, which you can actually see, that's the outline of Don't Up on Love. And I tried to outline that. I tried to outline that. And it's kind of a combination of my outline and pantsing as I'm trying to write it right now. So sometimes I get too in my own head about my outline, so I have to forget what I have outlined in order to actually write something. So it's like a combination of both of those things. So yeah, my craft process, I guess, is mostly like following my instincts. And in terms of like self-doubt and like not being able to read while I'm writing, I actually love to read when I'm writing, and I love reading YA, and often I love reading exactly the genre that I'm writing in, because if I find that I'm struggling with something, so right now I'm revising my Titanic book. So I've never written like a heist novel before. I've never written a historical novel before. So if I see like a particular point that I'm really struggling with, I'm like, well, I've never written like an action scene before, and I don't know if what I'm doing is right. I'm gonna go seek out a book that I think like does that really well. I'm gonna read it, and I'm gonna like be like, okay, so this is how somebody did an action scene. So what can I learn from this? And often, you know, I'll like read a bunch of different books from the same genre and compare them and see like what I can learn from it, and then take it to my own writing. And I think when you're doing it very consciously, you know, like you can't copy this, you can't plagiarize this. So because it's very conscious, like I don't think that ever happens. But it's really helpful for me in my writing.
Yeah, my process is pretty similar to Adiba's in that like it's all of the above. Like I do outline, but then sometimes I don't look at it, or sometimes I'm following, I'm like, wait, that doesn't make any sense, and I just go completely the opposite direction of my outline. And I do pan sometimes, and then I also like sometimes I'm like, oh, like sometimes I read the genre that I'm writing, because like for me, like Adiba said, it like helps me kind of like write my way around stuff that I wasn't really familiar with before. So basically everyone said, but with the addition of like music, for me, music is really important in my process, because music is kind of like how I like get in touch with the main characters' minds and what they're thinking and their emotions. And so I usually like build like a soundtrack to all my books, and like I find I put it out on repeat. And then sometimes I have a song that like represents a scene or a chapter I'm working on, and that's playing on repeat as I'm writing.
Wow. Is that that's so interesting to me, because your first big YA book is about a musician.
K-pop.
So yeah, right? Like, is
yeah,
that
so it worked out, I guess.
I like that.
I have to have complete silence when I write. I can't listen to music or anything. So I'm really jealous of people who have their nice, you know, playlists and everything. And I'm like, I can't. Just, I get too distracted.
I make like 2 playlists. One is for me to write to. So like I can only listen to like instrumentals or like movie soundtracks, but I do love the like atmosphere it builds, because then it's like, oh, if I'm writing an action scene, I try to like get something like super exciting and fun, or like a romantic scene, like, okay, here's like a long ballad. But if it has words in it, I'll listen to the words, and then I'll get distracted and start inventing a different story to go with that song. But I do love like making playlists for characters, and like you know, like what like you said, Lyla, about having like this song represents this moment or this turning point, or like how this character feels. And that's always fun to just put together while I'm like, I guess it's part of the drafting / writing process, when I'm just like, it's kind of like making like a audio mood board of like, what is this character feeling? But definitely while I write, it has to be, it's a completely different feel, where it's got, and it helps to like put me in the mood of like writing the historical novel. I got a lot of like music from that, like a contemporary music, but also like music from artists I felt like did represent the time and helped me get into that mindset. Like, oh, I can imagine that I'm in like 19th century China somewhere.
Yeah,
I'm the exact same. Oh, sorry. Go on, Misa.
Oh, right. But well, I was just going to say that I also have a really hard time writing with music words in the background. And I had never made a playlist, but for Love and Other Natural Disasters, I tried it because it was going to be a little bit different in tone from my other 2 books, just lighter and sort of fluffier. And yeah, and it kind of worked. Like I would just I have all these like 90s, like girly, fluffy pop songs, and I would listen to it a little bit before I got ready to write, and I was like, okay, all right, this is going to be the mood. Here we go. And fun.
Yeah, this is exactly what I do actually, because I can't listen to music with words in it when I'm writing. So I have playlists for each book that I write, and they're actually available on my website as well. So people like listening to them on Spotify. But these playlists I listen to right before I'm about to start writing. If I'm struggling to get into the voice of my characters, it really helps me kind of find that tone that I want to write in. And then when I sit down to write, like I'll listen to instrumental music, or it'll just be silence.
Yeah. Can we, I'm gonna just go into our next question. Is that okay? So to kind of bring the focus sort of to our topic, I want to know from all of you what just like how your take on writing intersectionally. I think for many of us, we've already talked about how we came to that decision, but the wonderful thing I think about writing a character of a particular background that's not, the default white, is that you can bring the nuance of your own culture and layer that on top of LGBTQ characters and issues. And I'd like to hear from you, like, how you incorporated those cultural specificities, whether it be families or, not, like, of course, I think a lot of us write about food because it's such an important part of being an Asian person in America, right? It's one way of identifying ourselves, but Yeah, so the motivations and inspirations behind the choices you made in creating this world that the character is queer within, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many different layers too that, like, depending on like the diaspora of like where you are, like whether you're like Asian American or Asian Australian or living in another like European country, or like every experience layers on top of another experience, and there's different ways that comes about. And I think one of the beauties of intersectional characters is that there isn't like one true experience or one true, like, you know, because as a culture, we're not a monolith, even though like even just the word Asian is like a identity that evolved as like a political / cultural identity, but it's so broad too, right? And you know, being able to reflect both the specificity of your experience, and also recognizing that like what I want to do with my characters, I want people to be able to see familiarity, but also to highlight like that there's so many different ways to be Asian, there's different ways to be queer, and where these intersect are going to be very unique to that person, to that family, to that experience.
Going off that, actually, because this is actually exactly why I wrote, I guess, Honey and Issue's Guide to Fake Dating, and what I was trying to do with it, because in Honey and Issue, there are two main like POV characters. So Honey is Bangladeshi, she's Muslim, or Bangladeshi Irish Muslim, and she is bisexual. And then Issue is Indian Bengali. She is like from a Hindu family, but she doesn't really like identify as Hindu. And she is she identifies as queer, so she doesn't have like a very specific identity. And they're, even though, you know, they're both Bengali, so they share that same Bengali culture, they're completely different just in their personalities. Like one of them hates people, one of them loves people. And yeah, it's just completely different. They have completely different like family dynamics, completely different kind of perspectives on life. One of them is very optimistic, one of them is like very pessimistic. So when I was writing this book, I was just really thinking about the fact that like when I was growing up here in Ireland, like when I told people like, oh, I'm from Bangladesh, they'd be like, India? And I'd be like, no. Or when I told people like I was Asian, they'd be like, you're not really Asian because India's not in Asia. And I was like, well, like, first of all, I'm not Indian. Second of all, India is literally in Asia, in South Asia. So, you know, I was growing up with all of these like different kind of stereotypes, and nobody ever really seeing me for who I was. So then with this book, I really wanted it to be like a celebration of Bengali culture, but a celebration that also showcases like the vast differences in this culture that so few people actually know about. But, you know, there are literally like millions of us in the world, and we're actually, Bangla is like the seventh most spoken language in the world, which not many people know about. So, you know, I just wanted this book to really celebrate Bengaliness, but also showcase our specificity and just how different we can be.
I'd like to actually, you know, just compare to Adiba and really to kind of reinforce her point. Like I grew up in Bangladesh, but my mom is from Pakistan, and I'm married to a Hindu man from India. So, I mean, my children are growing up in this household where the influences are so different from what I grew up in. But I grew up in a household where, you know, we spoke Urdu and Bangla at the same time. You know, we just spoke all of it, and we spoke German because I was born in Germany, because my parents happened to be working there when I was born. So it's just, there's so many variations of, you know, in the stories of like you can, like Adiba was saying, there's so many of us, but each of our stories are different, but they're also similar in some ways, you know. And it's the same thing with queer people from any culture. Some of their experiences are vastly different, and some of them might be the same. So, for example, in Love and Lives of RUKHSANA Ali, she comes from a strict, more, you know, a very strict household where her parents don't find this acceptable. But then Zara, I mean, she's not Bengali, she's Pakistani, but Muslim, her parents are completely fine with it. So in just two stories, you have these complete, you know, opposite reactions, and everything in between. And I think it's so important for people to not say, oh, this person is Muslim, they must be very, ultra like homophobic and everything, as if that doesn't exist in pretty much every culture. There are homophobic people everywhere. I mean, in Canada, there's conversion therapy camps today in North America. It's not something that, the Muslims or Hindus or Asian people or anybody has like some sort of monopoly over, and so I think it's so important for readers, especially readers who are not familiar or really our characters from our cultures, from our communities, to realize that there are Muslim teens who are falling in love. Some of them are falling in love with people that are not from their community, that are not acceptable to their parents or in their families, and others are completely fine in their families. And so it's everything. And it's so important, the more stories that come out, that we can see all these variations, and it kind of just really make people aware that we're not a monolith, that we're not all like whatever they think we are. And and it seems like we say this so much, like in every conversation we repeat this, but I think it bears repeating, because somebody right now is suffering from the result of this kind of thinking, that that we're all like whatever is in their minds. So and it's great that so many stories are coming out. When I started writing RUKHSANA back in 2015, 2016, I only found like maybe 2 books. I found Sarah Farazan's books about queer Muslim characters. That's all I found. And maybe I didn't look hard enough, but I still don't know anything that was published back then. So I mean, it's great that we have more, like we can come up with more than 2 books now about Muslim characters, Asian characters, who also are part of the LGBTQ community. But I mean, I'm hoping that 10 years from now we'll have so many that we can't possibly talk about them all. So yeah, so I think this is such an important conversation, and these books are so important for the kids that need to read them, because imagine I grew up my entire life, I didn't see a brown person in a book until I was 26 as the main character, and I feel like that's too late. You shouldn't have to wait till you're 26 years old to see a character that looks like you, that has the kind of life that you lead, that you can completely relate to. And I just think that's too long to wait.
How about you, Lyla?
Well, I was just thinking about like how my characters are Korean or Korean American. Like in I'll Be the One, Sky is Korean American, but her parents are more traditional in that they are immigrants, so she's not out to her parents. And Henry, the love interest in I'll Be the One, he's bisexual too, and he was actually he was forced to come out to his parents, and that was not a good experience for him. And that's also inspired by like my friend's siblings who also like kind of got found out by their parents, and didn't have a good experience with that as well. But then also my second YA book, which comes out next year, is called Flip the Script, and that book, the main character Hannah, she's Korean American, but she's kind of like a reverse immigrant, that she was born in America, but she lives in Seoul, Korea. And her parents, who are more American, are like actually okay with her being bisexual. So it's just very like kind of like what Sabina said about like how like we're not a monolith, and then there's a lot of different reactions and responses to being queer and the queer identity within the Asian community, as well as like after that Asian community.
Yeah, I'm finding a pattern between at least Sabina and Lyla and me, where the first character has to struggle with their parents, and then like same thing. That was my first book, and now my second book, her parents are totally fine. Because it is that whole like we're always battling against that one story, right? So it's yeah, and I love, Adiba, that you have also like this the two contrasting in the same book. So and I don't know, that's cool. And then like, you know, Carrie has this, I mean, your characters were in an alternate world, and I can't remember. It was like a normal thing, right, for her?
Yeah, I actually went the like opposite direction with like, because all the parents in the Sidekick Squad series, like all of them for all of my queer characters, are like extremely supportive and loving and like there, and it's kind of like wish fulfillment in a way, but I wanted teens to have that. I wanted them to see like all the families and all the chosen families as like, I wanted all these families to have like to not be a source of tension and conflict, because that series, you know, when I first started writing, was all about like I want this to be fun, I want this to be fluffy, I want this to be full of adventure and crushes and you know, flying robots and stuff, and it is. And you know, at the same time I do talk about like other themes, but you know, personally, because I struggled a lot with like acceptance and like complicated relationship with my parents and being queer, it is difficult to like bring that personal stuff into a novel. And then some of that has come out, like, you know, when I'm working with more contemporary pieces, and kind of what I'm working on now with a contemporary book that hasn't been announced yet. But there's like in The Clash of Steel, there's a very complicated mother-daughter relationship in there, and that has all to do with like, that's very cultural to me, very personal, about like the expectations of like feeling like, you know, your parents were immigrants and they sacrificed so much and they've done so much for you, and yet there's this divide of like expectation and understanding, and what their definition of success is versus your definition of success. And you know, and that there's, I touch on that in my first series, but I do kind of explore that a little bit more in subsequent books, and also just as I'm growing as a writer and becoming more comfortable like discussing these topics, and especially as the deeper and more thorny they are, just picking that out is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I could be making this up, but I think especially with immigrant narratives, when people are, the characters are the sons and daughters of immigrants, there's this same thing, additional layer of maybe a feeling of obligation, right? Or, you know, like they moved here for me. And I've enjoyed reading LGBTQ characters who are the sons and daughters of immigrants. That's something I can identify with, right? Like that extra layer of the culture clash, and like feeling like not only are my parents maybe homophobic, but I also like, do I really like, is it okay to upset them in this way, you know? And anyway, I always enjoy reading that aspect of everyone's books. And then, yeah, so who's got the next?
Oh, that's me. So I guess going off that, you know, there are a lot of challenges that also come with trying to write these intersectional identities, whether they're kind of internal challenges or whether they're external. So sometimes even coming from like the community around us. So, you know, are there any challenges that you guys have faced when writing these characters and these stories?
I have an example. So in The Love and Lives of RUKHSANA Lee, her parents treat her really horribly. But then in the end, she still comes back home to them. And I've had a lot of comments on that. People saying that, you know, like, why didn't she just leave? You know, why did she come back? If her parents are so awful, why did she just leave? And it's something, you know, I don't know if this is like, you know, I'm an older immigrant, a South Asian immigrant woman, but it's not the first thing that jumps to my mind is if my parents are awful to me, that I'm just going to run off and then just kind of leave. The first instinct is always to try and get them to understand where I'm coming from, to accept me, you know, with my choices. And I don't know, I didn't realize when I was writing it, it was such a natural thing for me to write that of course she would come back home. Yeah, she's mad at them. She hates them for that time, you know, for what they're doing to her. But her first thought is not that, oh, why don't I just like, whatever, forget it, cut ties with them and live my life, because I can technically. That's not her first instinct. Her first instinct is, you know, just like Misa was saying, they have sacrificed a lot. They came to this country to build a better, you know, to give her better opportunities, to give her a better life than what they thought, you know, they could have there. And so that sense of obligation, it's a very real thing. I feel, you know, it's not something that, you know, we just kind of make up in our heads. I think that's a very real, not a burden, I guess, but just it's a feeling. It's something. It's a sense of guilt and feeling that, you know, they've done so much for me. How can I like ruin all of it, you know, and then just kind of turn my backs on them? So I was very surprised when I got a lot of comments on this from people, not South Asian people, mostly from white readers, frankly, that, you know, like, why did she just not go away? Like, why did she have to stay with them? Why did she put up with them? Why did she forgive them? And so that kind of made me wonder, like, I mean, people have these complicated relationships with their families. They go through these phases where, you know, things are horrible, but I don't know. I don't think that unless, I mean, there's like, you know, if it's like way beyond, you know, redemption, I mean, there's a different thing. But I mean, in her mind, she's also recognizing that her parents are from they're a product of a different era, a different type of upbringing, you know, different way of thinking. You can't compare really, you know, like her parents' generation with her generation. I mean, you can't just ignore the fact that, you know, it's not like they're inherently evil. I mean, they've been good parents. They've given her a good life and, you know, a lot of love and everything. And so this is one thing that they cannot accept. And, you know, and I think for her to want to fight for her parents' love, I think, to me, that's more realistic than for her to say, oh, well, too bad, so sad, you know, they don't like what I'm doing, so I'm just going to leave. I feel like it shouldn't be such an easy, these are your parents. It's not like just somebody you met along the way. These are the people who've raised you. You know, these are the people that, you know, whose blood runs in your veins. I mean, you can't just, I don't know, you can't just like drop them and say, well, see you, bye. You know, I don't know. I don't know if that was just me, you know, being emotionally invested in these characters, or if that, I mean, I feel like if I were in that situation, like my parents weren't happy with me marrying outside my community, I didn't just like dump them and then, like, I was an adult. I was 26 years old when I got married. Technically, I didn't need them in that way, but I wanted their love and I wanted them to be in my life. So, you know, you try, right? Like you try and you keep trying. And then, yes, maybe for some people, there will be a point where, you know, you just can't do it anymore. But just as many people might, you know, have a good result. And at least, I mean, at least you would try, is what I'm saying, right? So that was something that I found really interesting to kind of, you know, explain to people. So yeah.
I actually I don't know, I'm about to spoil my book, but there's a similar dynamic in my third book, In Love and Other Natural Disasters, and I worry about people's reaction to some of the decisions that the characters make, because they're not the typical Western independent, I don't like, my values are so important, and if you can't accept them, then I can't accept you. And it's I mean, I'm not saying, yeah, it makes it sound like all white Americans are like that, which is not true. I know many, you know, people who've really struggled to like accept their parents or have their parents accept them. But yeah, not to generalize, but I think that's a big issue that a lot of Asian or children of immigrants struggle with, and often come down on the side of, I'm just going to stick with my family for so many reasons.
Yeah, I feel like it's so specific to the cultural experience, and like coming back to the intersection of writing like LGBTQ characters that are also Asian, like the experience of like how your family reacts and like the dynamics you have and the decisions you make are all going to be influenced by, like, you know, your specific family, and it's going to be different to everyone. And I, you know, there's a lot of like expectations I think that people have for like, well, why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that, where it makes sense to someone from like not from that culture be like, well, it just would make sense for her to leave, versus like it is messy, it's complicated, and love, like I think our you know, different parents show their love in different ways, and different, like it doesn't mean they don't love you and support you, but they may not be able to express it in the way that you want, you know, as a young queer person, or, you know, even generationally, the way that you want to be validated, it might not happen. And it doesn't mean that you can't find a way that works for you. And I think that's the beauty of having so many different perspectives, because you get to show that like there's nuance, and it feels real. Like I love your books because each of these family dynamics, I'm like, oh yeah, my auntie's like that, or like my mom was like that, and like it also there's elements of like, oh, I wish this was like this, but you get to explore both the positive and negatives, and feel like it just feels like it makes me feel seen too. Like I too understand this emotion, the complicatedness of like, you know, you love your parents, but you wish that they understood, or like it's that thread that is universal in that specific experience too.
Lyla, do you have any other challenges that you want to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about everyone's responses and how sorry, my dog's crazy, but about like how I feel like as a writer, I didn't really struggle with juggling those multiple identities, but it's more like the reader response that I struggle with, because I before I banned myself from Goodreads, a lot of the responses, some of the responses I got, I mean, not even just from Goodreads, but other sources too, were like, oh, why is she bisexual? It's only like a little part, it's only like a little detail that's mentioned in the book. Or like I've had parents who are like, oh, like we found out that the character was bisexual, and we thought it was a fun book about K-pop, but it wasn't. She's bisexual. We're not gonna read this book to our children. So it's just been like, so like the message that I've gotten from a lot of people that like, oh, why do they have to be queer and Asian, or why? That kind of like questioning has been definitely the hardest part for me as a good writer. And like, meanwhile, I'm like, I exist, a queer and Asian person. People like that exist in the world, like right beside you. Like you just don't see it. And I guess like for me, that has been like the biggest challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely been a challenge for me as well. I remember once for the Henna Wars, I saw someone, and I can't even remember like where this was, but I saw someone saying something like, oh, like the main character is like Muslim and she's like Asian and she's like a lesbian. It's like this author is trying to fit like every single marginalization she can find into this book. And I was like, I'm literally like, here, I exist, you know? So it's just, it feels, I know like it is funny, like when you think about it, but at the same time, I think when you see those kinds of comments, it can feel so invalidating. And it feels like, you know, people out there are literally saying like, well, you are too much if you actually exist as a person. And so I think that can be something that's very challenging, because a lot of the times, like this kind of criticism that you see, it can feel very personal, and it can be difficult to kind of separate the personal from the fact that, you know, it's just a book at the end of the day. Like, yes, you poured your heart and soul into it, but it is a fictional book. But even, you know, speaking about, you know, everything you said about like the parents and you know our queer Asian characters kind of struggling with you know being accepted by their parents. I've seen comments from people on my books where they're like, well, you know, it wasn't realistic that you know, Nishat would be accepted at the end of the Henna Wars, that her parents would come around. And I was like, like thinking, you know, I know people who for sure would accept their kids at the end of the day, even if it was a struggle. And I was thinking like, that is such an invalidating thing to say, not just to those people that I know, but to every single, you know, queer Asian person who is maybe thinking about what their parents' response might be, because they're seeing this and they're thinking, you know, I will never be accepted. And if it's a struggle, then I should just, you know, leave. I should, like Sabina said, I should just leave. I should cut ties. There's no solution for me. And, you know, that is not the message that I ever want to give any, you know, any queer kids in general, but especially queer Asian kids, because I think we get this message a lot anyway, where we're like, oh, like our parents, they're too strict, they're this and they're that. You know, a lot of the time they are more traditional, but I always try to think about the fact that, you know, for so many of our parents, they've really had to go through a lot of things. I know, like for my Bangladeshi parents, you know, they literally survived like a war and everything. So, you know, there's a lot of trauma there, and yes, they're immigrants, so there's also that. So, you know, I really want our readers to be able to think that, you know, our parents are also human, and you know, the parents of these characters are human, and they come to queerness from a very specific perspective. And it's important to recognize that even if parents might be traditional, even if they might have certain expectations, there is the possibility that they will love and accept you for who you are at the end of the day, even if it might take a while. So I think for me, like that is also like a big challenge, just feeling like I'm being invalidated, but also that other queer people in our community are being invalidated, and that they might think that there's no kind of hope at the end of the day, because I want them to always have that. I think Lyla has the next topic, right?
Well, I think mine is, oh, I'll just say it. Well, let's just say mine wasn't this one, but it's okay. So we all have projects that we are excited about, either in the past or upcoming. So how about we go around and talk about the projects that we're excited about?
Okay. I want Sabina to tell us about hers.
I have a young adult contemporary coming out next year that has not been announced, and all I'm allowed to say is it has a dual voice and dual timelines, and that's all I can say, even though I want to say a lot more. And then just I'm working on some middle grade fantasy that I also can't talk about. But yeah, and I have other middle grade and other young adult things that I'm working on, since I can't really go anywhere. So, you know, this year and last year has all just been about, you know, coming up with new ideas and writing. But of course, as publishing goes, you can't talk about anything forever. So, who's next?
I can go next. So I guess the most upcoming project for me is actually this book, HANI and ISHU'S Guide to Fake Dating, because it's coming out May 25th, so very soon. And I'm very excited about that. But I also have, in 2022, I have my first historical called A Million to One, which is about 4 girls who board the Titanic to steal a jewel-embedded book. So it's my first historical, and I hope people like it. I'm currently revising it, and it's been interesting. And then in 2023, I have another rom-com called Do Not Fall in Love, which is also sapphic, and it's about this girl called Shirin who is the daughter of like donut shop owners, and she decides to enter this Great British Bake Off style baking competition, but the problem is her ex-girlfriend is there, and she still kind of has some feelings for her, and she's also falling for another one of her competitors, so she is dealing with all of those things. And then I also have I have scheduled like a 2024 rom-com as well, which I don't actually have any idea what that's going to be. And I'm also working on like a couple of other things, like I'm working on an MG, and you know, just a couple of other things. Like Sabina said, you know, it's a pandemic. We're all working on lots of different things. But I don't know if anything's going to come of those things, but hopefully, fingers crossed.
You got a lot going on.
It's so exciting. I
It's so
can't wait to read
exciting. All of it
these.
sounds so exciting.
I'll go. Yeah, I also have, my very next upcoming thing is this, which is Love and Other Natural Disasters, sapphic rom-com, coming out June 8th. And yeah, I only have one other thing that I'm working on, which I'm not really allowed to talk about yet, but it's middle grade. I guess, we'll leave it at that. But I'm really, really excited about it. So can't wait to tell you more.
What you, Phoebe?
Oh yeah, coming up for me in September, I actually will have 2 releases technically. But yeah, one is we're doing a 5th anniversary edition of Not Your Sidekick, which will be really exciting and fun. There's going to be a lot of bonus content, like new chapter additions and an interview and fun art, and it's going to be really fun, and it's really celebrating the just the book itself and the series, and it's really special to me because it's really what kind of it is my second novel, but I feel like it is what really, it was the first book that I was like, I'm just going to write exactly like someone with my identity, and you know, like Adiba said, like the fear of being too much, and I was like, well, I'm just going to write it. And it is really a book that was like for like my 16-year-old self, and I'm excited that it's gotten the reception that it does. So the 5th anniversary edition will be out in September, and then the week after I will A Clash of Steel will be out, and that's up for pre-order now, and it is a the Queer Treasure Island remix, and it's my first historical, and it was honestly a delight to write, and you know, just the adventure aspect, and it's very like flirty with swords and fun, and I hope people enjoy it. And yeah, coming up next, I've got some stuff I can't talk about, but I have a contemporary fantasy that hasn't been announced, but we will announce soon, I hope. And then more shenanigans, and obviously the last Sidekick Squad book, Not Your Hero, which I'm very excited about, and also like sad also, because it's like the end of an era with this series, but it's I'm like sad to say goodbye, but also it's like, you know, it's been a wonderful experience, and I'm excited that like to have so many wonderful people to go on this journey with.
Oh, that's also exciting. Well, I'll wrap things up by saying that like for me, I have a young adult book coming out next year, and it's called Flip the Script. We haven't like released the cover or anything yet, but it's about a Korean American girl who currently lives in Seoul, Korea, and she's trying to make it into the K-drama industry, and she's like a young actress, but then due to entertainment politics, she gets involved in this fake dating scheme with one of her co-stars, all the while having secret feelings for her female co-star instead. So that's coming out next year. I think everyone else went, right, for this. Okay, so finally, as like a final wrap-up question, I wanted to ask, and I think when this was touched, I feel like we all talked about it like during this discussion, but some final words about what you think is like the importance of writing LGBTQ characters and why you chose to write about it. Does anyone have any final thoughts?
Well, I wrote it, honestly, I wrote it for my daughter. You know, when I first came out, I just wanted to write something that, you know, she could like, so, you know, she could go to a store and find books about characters that look like her, that come from families like her, and just different variations of that. So yeah, that was like my initial motivation.
I came to writing queer Asian characters because when I was younger, I used to think that Asian people can be queer because, you know, I never saw queer Asian people anywhere, and I didn't see any books, any TV shows, any movies or anything with queer Asian people. So I was like, well, I guess we can't be queer. So obviously that's not true. So I think it's just really important to have that like representation for, you know, people like me when I was younger, but also for people in general to see that, you know, queerness is actually like a very inherent part of being Asian. I mean, I don't know about the history of all of Asia, but I know that in the history of South Asia, queerness is was a very big part, and it's still a big part of our culture. And, you know, it's been there for a long time. So, you know, I really want people to understand that, you know, queerness and Asianness are not like mutually exclusive things. They can and do exist together. And I want queer Asian teens to be able to see themselves in books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually, in my first book, there's a character who, like, the main character comes out to her friends, and one of her friends says, "But you can't be a lesbian because Asians aren't lesbians. Like they don't exist." Yeah, and so they have that very exchange. And I exactly. I wrote the same for the same reasons everyone. I wasn't seeing queer Asians, and both of those identities are very important to me. And I just thought there's a whole country full, a whole world full of people out there who aren't seeing this either, and this is something they need to see. So, yeah.
It comes all back to like, and I totally agree. And I love this conversation has just been so like fulfilling and inspiring, because like I'm like left with like, oh, I can't wait to read all of your next books. But it leaves that feeling is what I want readers to feel like when they walk into a bookstore, into a library, to feel like they're home, you know, that they're seen, that these characters, that they aren't alone, you know, that they're recognized, and their feelings, their identities are valid. And that's really why, you know, I think it's important to continue to write and to inspire these stories for decades to come. Lyla, why do you write? What's the importance for you?
Well, for me, like kind of like what everyone else said, where like I grew up thinking that like I couldn't be queer because I'm Asian, or I'm Korean specifically, and also Catholic, but that's a whole nother story. But anyway, so I write books because the more queer Asian characters we have out there, the more queer Asian characters out in the world, we'll see that it's normal and it's perfectly fine to be queer Asian, etc. And like people touched on before, we're not a monolith, and it'd be so good to like have a lot of like queer voices out there representing all aspects of like different Asian cultures and different like reactions to queerness. So yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you all so much for this amazing conversation. Let's close on just going quickly around and talk about where folks can find you, and how they can best support you. I can be found at cb-lee.com, and then my Instagram and Twitter are cblee_cble.
I can be found on Twitter and Insta at Sabina_writer. And yeah, I'm on Twitter a lot, so you can find me there.
My website is adibajaigirdar.com, and my Twitter is adiba_j, and my Instagram is dibs_j. And you can support me by buying my books.
Misa, do you want to go?
Oh, sure. Yes. My website is misasugiura.com. And yeah, the spelling's right there on the on the screen. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at miscellaneous. That's MISALL, like spell it like miscellaneous, but Misa, anyway, MISA. I get like when I start to spell it, I get lost. Miscellaneous one, or you can just look up my actual name and you'll find me.
And my website is LylaLeeBooks.com, and both my Instagram and Twitter. I'm not on Twitter as much though. It's literally Lyla. So. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having us here, and hope that everyone checks out all the panels for the month from the Asian Author Alliance.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, bye.
Bye.